side trip, Charles W. Forster, the toothpick king of Dixfield and Strong, he died in 1901, and his son was left out of the will. He could run the mills, but he couldn't own them. And that really bothered him. The mills went into an estate, and the estate was administered by Oscar Hersey from Buckfield, and I want to say a White House, but it wasn't a White House. But there was another attorney later on, and his son, he hated it. So he and John S. Harlow, right here, teamed up to go into the toothpick mill business to compete with his father's mill, even though he was running his father's mill. So they put up 3 more toothpick mills in Dixfield. So that's why Harlow got out of the spool business. He was too busy with spool mills, and he started what became known as Burst Foster Dixfield. And they had plants all over New England, up in Oakland, in Mattawamkeag, other places. And they ran right up until the Diamond Match Company overswamped them and bought them out. So anyway, here we are, these 3 mills again, and Stowell's now running them all. So, okay, now he's the only person on the letterhead, and he's the, I can't read that, but...
President and treasurer.
Okay, and this is his son, Arthur Newton Stowell, the superintendent, and this A.J. Thornley, I think it's from Augusta or Pawtucket, Rhode Island. He's with Coates and Clark. Coates, back then it was Coates. Because Coates financed the purchase of a lot of these mills. But was George L. Merrill through? No. 1901, he purchased the old Alpheus S. Bean mills in West Bethel, because Alpheus had died, and they were near the railroad station, and he possibly bought the spool mill of Isaac Morrill. I don't know that, but I'm going to try to pursue that. And Stowell had been in West Bethel helping Merrill and Nelson Springer make their decisions. I can find a newspaper article in the day that says they were there. And it was 1901. And then suddenly, N.S. Stowell's not part of that mill anymore. Oh. The reason is, well, he bought 3 mills in Dixfield, and he better just concentrate on running those. So he sold out his interest in the West Bethel spool mill, but not forever, if you know NS. So this mill burned about 1906, and the townspeople were desperate. The West Bethel townspeople were desperate that he rebuild. And he said he was going to rebuild in West Bethel, but he didn't. He built what became known as the Hanover Dowell Company, but he did build a sawmill in West Bethel to feed the mill in Bethel. And that, we knew it as Kendall's when we grew up in West Bethel. Okay, then Merrill retired to Searsport in 1913. He was born in 1840, so he was 73 when he retired. And so Springer ran the mill until 1919, and he sold it to N.S. Stowell, but Springer stayed to run it. And Stowell closed it in 1935. Oh, what came with that mill also for N.S. Stowell was the Bethel Electric Company. Or was it the Water Company? I think it was the Electric Company. Because in many towns, the main source of electricity in the towns were the mills. They would buy the dynamos and they would have excess power and they'd sell it off to the townspeople. So often a mill would come with the electric supply. Stowell closed it in 1935 at the height of the Depression because he was retired by then. Then he sold it to the Saunders brothers in 1940 to replace their Hanover mill, which had burned in 1939. This would be Addison Saunders and Addie and the others. I just don't know their names. Now we're up in Gilead. I could have put in better graphics here, but this just shows that John W. Bennett, who conventional wisdom said he never owned a spool mill. I can put him owning 2 or maybe 3. Documented. I don't think I've documented it in the slideshow, but anyway, they say William E. and Julius P. Skillings made spools in Gilead, and nobody knows that. Gilead doesn't know that. Gilead doesn't know that any of these existed. And I'm hoping somewhere there are files, artifacts somewhere I can go through that just makes mention of this, but you just hope that these documents exist. But I do have evidence of the George Layton Company, This was their boarding house in Gilead, about 1910, and this was their store, and they manufactured, can't quite read it, but it says they manufactured spool, bobbins, dowels, and maybe novelties, I can't read that. And they also offered gasoline and automobile supplies. And there was a store here, but I blew this up and looked at it, and it looks like the doors are blocked off, and that's no longer a store. And I think it might have been because the store that became Bo Beans was put in. I'm just guessing, about 1910. And the roots of the Timmins Mill and Locks Mills go back to Lisbon, Maine, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Boston. Here's a Mr. J.K. Bassett of Boston has purchased the mill property at Locks Mills, and at the time it was a bedstead factory, I think, or a woolen factory, because it was both at one time. Oh, it says right there, woolen factory, and then to be filled with machinery for the manufacture of spools. But apparently it didn't last very long, because I can't find much else about it. But what I can find is that says IG, it's J.G. Tibbetts and Company of Lisbon have purchased the Locks Mills Company property for $6,000. They're manufacturing Excelsior staves and spools. Excelsior was yesterday's peanuts. It was packing material for medicines and glass and that kind of stuff. So a lot of mills just took shavings or took waste wood and made it into Excelsior. It was kind of the bottom of the line in the wood turning industry. So that's 1867. And then we have Mr. John Dearborn and Emerson Brownell of Portsmouth come in. And John Dearborn was a force to be reckoned with. He was not, I would guess he's not an easy man to partner with, because he impresses me just reading information about him, that he knew what he wanted, he knew what he was about. He would have discussions, but he would make the decision. And if you didn't like the decision he made, you would adjust to it. And if you couldn't adjust to it, he had his lieutenant, Emerson Brownell, making sure that to fix the damage. So John Dearborn's one of my favorite people. And this burned. When did this burn? 1879. The spool mill burned. It had been going for about 15 years, and it burned flat. Everything was gone. So Dearborn and Tibbetts took the opportunity to part ways, and they both published, dissolution of partnership notices in the paper. It kind of read like, man, we can't wait to get rid of each other. We just can't wait. And the mill which replaced the original Dearborn Tibbetts and Dearborn Mill was operated as a Tibbetts Manufacturing Company. And the noted writer Joshua Gross Rich noted in 1882 that the mill had 7 Parker spool machines and 3 K machines, and they could put out between 2 and 2.5 million spools a month. That sounds like a lot. The last days of the Dixfield Spool Mill, they were running 1 million spools a day.
Peter, any idea how long it took to build some of these mills? I mean, they're massive buildings, and they seem to burn and be replaced quite
Let me see, that burned in, when did I say? Right there. It burned in November or December 1879. It was open next July. Okay, once turned, the spools were stamped with a name chosen by the buyer. And we have a stamper with us tonight that used to do that. Stamp the name of the company or the lot number or whatever it was that the customer wanted stamped on the end of the spools. And they did that not only to know whose spool it was, but to know what factory it came from in case they had problems with it. You pick up the phone and it says, okay, these are running like 0.001 inches, too narrow. We need you to look into that. If it's some moisture problem, is it a sharpening problem on your knives? What's going on? So that's what the stamping was all about. And then they were turned into giant drums with blocks of beeswax where they were removed of rough spots and given a dull polish. And then from 25 to 115 gross were then bagged for shipment. 25 gross would be very large spools, and 115 gross would be small spools. And 165 bags would fill a boxcar. And shipment of the partial orders was necessary to keep up with customer demands. The Coates and Clark companies were not just getting their spools from the companies I'm talking about here. They were getting them wherever they could find them. It was just dog eat dog. There was a constant drumming network of buy spools and sell spools, and it was quite complicated, but also very well documented. And this is still the Tebbetts Mill, and this is the office. And this is the store of Charles E. Stowell, no relation, none. And when the mill burned in 1879, Captain John Dearborn accepted a tax offer from Bryant's Point to locate a mill named Lake Christopher. And John Tibbetts rebuilt his mill, this one here. And they opened within 2 weeks of each other in July 1880. And the keynote speaker for the Tibbetts Mill was Enoch Foster, Judge Enoch Foster. The keynote speaker for the Bryant Pond Mill was Enoch Foster, Judge Enoch Foster. And there was a lady by the name of Rosemary Rawson who wrote a poem to Tibbetts about what a great man he was and thanked him for opening the mill and rebuilding, and that poem was read at the dedication. I did have it in here, but I took it out. Okay, this is the Tibbetts Manufacturing Company letterhead, 1890. And this is a report of the Judiciary Committee, and I think this is 1875, authorizing the incorporation of the Oxford Manufacturing Company, which was basically the same people, except over here we had Eben Rand and Jesse Lyford, who was the former mayor of Lewiston, and there were a few others. And I never could figure out what Oxford did, but concluded that maybe they were the machine shop arm of the spool mill, but I don't know. I'll try to learn more about it. And then, this is new information, you're seeing it here. The Wheeler Lumber Company was in North Paris, I can't locate it exactly, but they went belly up about 1920, and the Tibbetts Company purchased the mill and renamed it the Tibbetts Novelty Company. And they could have made Stowell Plinker targets for Arthur R. Luck Stowell. Again, these guys are not relatives, it's just a coincidence. And I wouldn't have known about these Stowells, except I have a friend who's a retired fish and wildlife biologist and said, "What do you know about Arthur Stowell?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "Well, we're trying to track him down to see if he existed because he's credited with making a fishing lure back in the day, and we want to put that in the museum up at Oquasac and give us some information." So it took us 2 years to document the fact that this guy lived. And then we found pictures of him, and in fact he's in that Nettie Maxim Cummings book, the Oxford County region that has Locks Mills in it, and Greenwood and Bryant Pond and South Paris and so forth. There's a picture of Charles Stowell in it, and Luck.
The U belongs in Arthur too.
What?
The U belongs in Arthur too.
Me? Oh.
A-R-T-H-E-R.
Oh. Got it.
It was an unusual spelling. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, back there, yeah.
Okay, we're going to do from left to right. This is the Plinker target. This is the 22 coming in. And this is a piece of birch wood on a shaft. And there's a space behind it. And this is held firmly in place by a screw. The bullet hits it and knocks it back against a metal plate and breaks it. So that's how you know that you hit the target. And you can also hit the bottom of it. And if it doesn't shatter on the left and right side, you can plink the left and right side. And you would put up maybe 20 or 30 of these on a backstop, and you would just start shooting. And a while ago, I was able to buy the Plinker target boxes off eBay. But I donated them both to the Aquastic Museum, so, and I didn't have a picture of it. I would put it in. Okay, this is an Arquette photo. Was it Walter Arquette? Do you know?
You remember?
Okay, it's Mr. Arquette was a photographer in town, and he took this photo of the Captain Dearborn Mill, just guessing around 1900 or so. Wonderful picture that the Woodstock Historical Society was graciously lent me, and I just love this picture. This is the railroad track, and there's a little railroad car, and there's a little platform that comes down, a loading dock, and this is the stairs up into the mill. This is storage, and these are the finished product.
That building is one that's still standing right now, the storage building.
Yep, you can look right out the window and see that. Still there. And they had provided employment for 40 or more employees after they rebuilt in 1880. And again, this is from the Woodstock Historical Society, a wonderful picture because it shows a picture of the Dearborn Mill, much as it looked at its dedication. Although this is the replacement mill, this isn't the original, it's a replacement, but it's a carbon copy of the original. And then on Friday, March 7th, 1884, the boiler exploded, killing 4 men. And it made news everywhere. Boom. That's it. And killed were Portland Boilermakers John Sweeney, who was unmarried, Patrick Boyce, who left a family. They were both from Portland. Grand Trunk Railroad section boss Charles Swan of Woodstock, who left a wife and 3 children. And mill engineer Alfonso A. Brown of Bethel, whose body was recovered over 400 feet away. And you can see the engine house was here, it's completely gone, and it blew up into the storage area, and it blew up into the mill, taking out the whole side of it. And there are several men there, 1, 2, 3, maybe another, surveying the damage and trying to figure out what happened. So, and then a coroner's inquest was convened, and they concluded the obvious, that 4 men were killed by an explosion. And then John Dearborn sued the Portland Company for a faulty repair job on the boiler, and he lost. And somebody Monday night asked me, why did it explode? Well, it had been showing leaks. It was only 4 years old, but it was leaking. Some of the steam was coming out of places it shouldn't be coming out of. So they had the engineers come up from Portland to look at it, and they had patched it, and they were testing the strength of the patch. And the boiler was rated for 70 pounds a square inch, and they took it up to 111, at which point it exploded. And nobody paid. Okay, now we have 3 pieces of stationery from the Dearborn Company, and this one shows that Dearborn owned it. This one shows that Frank Cold and Jacob Thurston owned it, J.A. Thurston, who never owned a spool mill according to family. He owned 3. And then down here, Frank Cold and Arthur Ricker. And this is documentation that Jacob Thurston bought it. And this is another picture of the Dearborn Mill. I was tempted to say it was the Stowell silk spool. They look exactly alike because it's the same building, but I have to look closely at the markings and say, no, that's the Dearborn Mill. I go back and forth on it, but finally decided that's the Dearborn Mill. And here's the stationery blown up, and this tells you what kind of a man he was. On his last letterhead, 1904, he said he was established in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, 1865, removed to Logs Mills, Maine, 1868, destroyed by fire, 1879, rebuilt at Bryant Pond, Maine, 1880, wrecked by boiler explosion, 1884, lived through the depression of the 90s, and still on deck. That's why you have to like him.
That's middle of the kind.
And he was an old man at that time, and he was just proud to have lived through all of that stuff and managed the mill through all of that stuff. It was just an incredible accomplishment and testimony to himself. And I'm going back here just to show you that spool makers don't always get it right, because up here he's selling silk and thread spools and novelty wood, and down here silk and thread spools and novelty wood. Anyway, there's another nice picture loaned me by Woodstock Historical. And the main thing I like about this picture is I didn't try to fix it, but this man right here is John Dearborn. The only picture I've seen of him. Okay, now we get into Stowell Silk Spool Company and Kirk Stowell. And I think 1930 he came in, and he had been superintendent of the Andover Mill before George Stowell was. And I don't know where I read that, but I did, and it really surprised me. I think he became the manager of the Andover Mill because he had graduated from the University of Maine with a degree in forestry. And he was getting experience running that mill. And then he was brought down to Stowell Silk Spool. And this sign here is replicated here, and I think I got it right. And I only got it right because I searched for Stowell Silk Spool on the internet, and this piece of stationery came up that featured that sign, and the author of the stationery quoted the wording on it. So I could copy it and put it down here, but I think that's it. And then the Stowell Mill burns in 1955, as recorded by the Biddeford Daily Journal. I remember that day. 125 workers unemployed. And I thought this picture of the Stowell Mill, Stowell Silk Spool, which is really, you can see that building right there out that window. I thought this picture was taken about 1980, but there was a sharp-eyed gentleman in West Paris Monday night who said, no, that's 1987. I said, how do you know? And he says, well, you see that truck there, APA? He says, yeah. He says, that was the old Sanborn company that was taken over by an out-of-state corporation called APA, and they took it over in 1987. He used to drive for them. So this is how I remember the mill. And I remember, this is the engine room, and I remember going in there every noontime and playing 63, a card game, with Bergie, Barrymont, and either Edgar or Morris Morgan, and Blynn Collins, and if I was lucky, they would let me play. And the thing I remember most, I'm looking for something I can thump on. I better be careful. But anyway, Blynn Collins had lost all his fingers in an accident, and he held his cards like this between his fingers, and he could read them. And when he would get the card he wanted off the deck, he would take his hand with his fingers like that, bang, slam it down on the table. There, God damn it! And you had to look at that hand. You just had to, and that's why he did it. He was a great guy. I love Blynn Collins. This is the water tower that drew water from Lake Christopher, which is over here. This is the new sawmill. This is the pumping station that pumps the water in from Lake Christopher and sends it up here. And this is 75 feet above the mill. I think I read that on a Sanborn map. And this is the automatic waste system that takes the waste from the sawmill and blows it over into a storage area here. And at some point it goes over into the boiler. And it might have to do with temperature and humidity, how much water is in it before it goes in the boiler. That's pick right spool machine. Pick is sitting right over here. Chet Rand's boy. And this is Ruby Hart Coolidge. And She was a classmate of mine in Bethel schools, and this picture is taken about 1980. You can see this is either a cloth or very fine dust that's just collected cobweb style. But you can see that most of the dust goes into a takeaway system and gets joined with other debris from the takeaway system and shot up and out. So it's much healthier than the picture you saw in Dixfield, where people were wallowing in that stuff. And this is Samuel Timberlake, the manager of the mill, and Dexter Stowell, the ambassador of the mill. And it looks like they have some bobbins. Wow. Okay. And they're discussing business. Here's an overview of the mill. And we're in this building right here, right now. I think I can see my brother there. And my sister. And I don't know the date of that photograph. Anybody got guesses? 1980? I have a new mill here, so anyway. And then the cemetery, and then down in here there's a little piece of heaven. And right in here is Dearborn Grove. Okay, the mill on the right, this one was Foster and Buck in 1858, it burned. It was Foster and Holt in 1858, and then Caleb Butterfield ran it from 1860 to 1886, and then Parker and Sawyer in 1881, and it was a sash, blind, and door company. This picture is on page 103 of Randy Bennett's Illustrated History of Bethel, and it's unidentified because nobody knew what it was, but we probably Palmer and I probably tracked down 8 or 10 articles about it, and we could put together the ownership of it. In fact, we just put this information together today. And then Parker and Sawyer converted to a spool mill in 1872. It later reverted to a grist mill, and I can find from an old Sanborn map that it was scheduled to be demolished in 1894. This was the site of Pete Chapin's garage. Yeah, and this is where the IGA would have been the original one. And this is High Street going up to the church. Back then, High Street went all the way through to Church Street. And this is Main Street. This is Vernon Street over here. The Civil War Memorial Park would be right here. And Mechanic Street goes down there.
Who was the Foster? Any idea?
I think we've got his name, but anyway, so that is quite historical. And this is one of those dirty pictures where this was all just, it was crap. It was just, it looked like this.
Wow.
So I just photoshopped it all out and
Nice.
just cleaned it up a little bit so you could enjoy it. And maybe that's even a team of horses bringing wood to the mill. Just a guess. And all those buildings are gone. There's none of them left. That's the original Bethel Chair Company. Before it was over on Railroad Street. And this is the Maryland Springer Spool Mill, constructed in 1907 or 8. It became NS Stowell Mill in 1919 and Hannibal Dowell in 1940. This is a real rare picture, and this came from an article written by Mary Clough Rice Keniston, whose grandfather was Eber Clough and ran these mills, and he lived right here. And this is the dam that was down on Millbrook. And then Eber Clough turned it over to, I want to say Eben Kilbourne, but that might not be the case, but Eben Kilbourne ran a lot of mills around the Bethel area, but Kilbourne didn't keep it very long, and he sold it to Isaac Morrow. So Isaac Morrow had this one, he had the one in West Bethel, and he had one in North Bethel. And here it shows that E. Clough made spools, because nobody in Bethel thinks he made spools. So I try to document all that stuff. And I sent a note to Randy Bennett in the Bethel Historical Society a couple days ago and said, I'm probably going to upset a lot of conventional knowledge when I talk about the spool mills in Bethel. He says, go for it. Looks like you've uncovered a lot. So, railroad stations were important, and all the mills I've talked about were on railroads, and some literally just out the front door, back door, and you're right there. This is a spur that goes up to Hanover Dowell. And that kid there, Curtis Cole says that's him. Do you know Curtis Cole from Bethel?
Sure, he loved the trains. He was down there all the time watching. He was our next door neighbor. Yeah.
This is about 1957, somebody said. Now we come to the Skillings Mill. It says W.E. Skillings, manufacturer. This is his business card. Thread, silk, and tram spools, and I don't know what tram spools are. This is another picture of the Hanover Dowell Company. And this is the Skillings spoolwood card. In Bethel, you open it up and it gives you instructions on how to measure the wood coming in from the loggers. Scale. It could have been Skilling's own scale, because scales were not standard. A lot of companies used the Bangor scale, but a lot of them made their own. So, in fact, there was a guy down in York County that wrote a book on the different scaling methods in Maine. And this is J.A. Thurston's mill in Bethel, 1908. Just one of the many mills he had. He had mills in Hale, he had mills in Newry, he had mills in Ketchum, and he had mills in Northwest Bethel. North Bethel. Now, the last mill presented here is a mystery in many ways. Its beginnings are murky, its relationship to another mill is unclear, and its ever-changing parade of owners and contracts and lawsuits are confounding. But this is what I believe right now, and I'm talking about the steam sawmill in Skillington and the Bethel steam mills in Skillington, right next to each other. I always thought there was one mill there, owned by Skillings. But, okay, it gets a little crazy, so I'm going to try to work through it. This is what I believe. A steam mill, sawmill was built west of Bethel in 1855 by Alfred H. Garish and William Garish. They sawed lumber for the Crooker shipyard in Bath. Alfred later relocated to Berlin, New Hampshire. I don't know what became of William. So this is an 1880 map that shows both of them on the map. And by 1880, Skillings owned the Bethel steam mills, but who owned the Bethel sawmill, or the steam sawmill? Did he? He could have, but history is silent. Okay, some history. In 1852, in Berlin, New Hampshire, John Brown, Hezekiah, and Nathan Winslow from Portland built a sawmill just above town. They sold it a few years later, and one of the buyers was Alfred Garish, who had finished the Bethel steam mill here, and Garish's mill became the Berlin Mills and later the Brown Company. About 1860, John Lynch of Portland and attorney David Hamlins of Lovell bought the Bethel steam mill. That's the steam sawmill. Okay, around 1870, Hezekiah Winslow bought it. You know, he's the guy that had the mills up here called Winslow Mills in Berlin that became Berlin Mills that later became the Brown Company. How do I know that all took place in succession? Because the Brown Company letterhead in the early 20th century says established 1852. So that's these guys. All right. So Hezekiah Winslow bought it, he refurbished it, expanded the local store, put in a school, and erected several houses for workers that we call Skillingston, but more likely should be called Winslowton. But nobody knows this history. Then a few years later, maybe 1876, David and Skillings of Portland and Winchester, Massachusetts, bought the mill or mills. Later, newspapers referred to the mills as the Bethel Steam Mill and the village as Steam Mill. So this is the Bethel Steam Mill in Steam Mill. Some accounts say the Bethel Steam Mill was built in 1863, yet I can date it to 1855. It burned in 1863, it was rebuilt in 1864, and was then granted a 10-year tax exemption by Bethel, provided that they rebuilt on the same spot. Now, if they rebuilt on the same spot, it had to be built before 1863, because that's when it burned. So, okay, and then in 1882, David Skillings moved 6 spool machines from his spool mill near Burlington, Vermont, to the Skillings Mill in Bethel. This made the mill the largest producer of spools in Oxford County. Nevertheless, the mill was star-crossed. It burned in 1863, 1876, taking the Burbank and Sanborn houses with it. Sanborn and Burbank houses. And yet, if you go onto the Bethel Journals, it talks about people living in those houses in 1880. Well, they burned in 1876, so there's just a lot of misinformation. Okay, 1876, and it burned in 1892, 1905, 1937, 1957, and the boiler room burned in 1959. So I call it star-crossed. And it kind of conforms with my very first impression of that mill, that there was something wrong with it. I always thought there was something wrong with it when I went by it. There's something that doesn't add up here. This was not a mill I wanted to be associated with. This wasn't Newton and Tibbetts, and this wasn't Hanover Dowell, or it wasn't Stowell Silk School. There was something wrong with this mill. I always knew it. And here it is, 50, 60 years later, and I figured out what it was. So, oh, kids, you gotta love them. So anyway, John Lynch was a 4-term congressman from Portland, and he arrived in Washington months before Lincoln was shot. Lynchville in Albany is named for him, as he had sawmills there, as well as the Bethel Steam Mill. He founded Lynch, Elliott, and Bartlett, and after his terms were over, he stayed in Washington and manufactured bricks and drain pipes. He also owned a large part of the Lewiston Steam Mill. In fact, when the fire took place in 1863, I can find an article in the newspaper that says Lynch is considering moving his Bethel operation to Lewiston, where he already owned the steam mill there. Well, he didn't do that, but that was a consideration. And Lynch's partner in the Bethel Steam Mill was David Hammonds. He'd also been a congressman in the 1840s. He'd learned law in Alfred, Maine, and set up his practice in Lovell. And he moved to Bethel to oversee his lumber operations at the Bethel Steam Mill, all the while remaining an active attorney. He was born in 1808 in Cornish and died in Bethel in 1888. And this is his gravestone at the Woodland Cemetery. Now, the Woodland Cemetery is below Mill Hill to the left. Okay, because I've seen it as a wood lawn as well. Woodland. And David Skillings was born in Portland, Maine in 1818 and died in Winchester, Massachusetts, 1880, so he was 62. He started as a carpenter and he loved houses, having a dozen of them built in Winchester on Rangeley Estates, a section of the town he developed for his families and friends. Many of his houses are in the National Register of Historic Places. This is taken from his gravestone of 18. And MS, so I put that in there because when I saw MS, it solved a riddle. I wondered who, I'd seen it on a document and wondered who it was. It was his younger brother. I don't know his name, but 1816 to 1893. And there he is, 1903. Very truly yours, J.P. Skillings, per MS, his brother. So his brother was running his Sumner Mill. And this is the telephone book in Bethel, Maine, 1900. Oh, I love it. You had a pay station in Bryant Pond, you had a pay station in Gilead, and Mrs. Lucinda E. Bean in West Bethel. That would have been Alpheus Bean's wife, Lucinda Mason Bean. All right, and then you had all of these people, an exhaustive list of people in Bethel that had telephones in 1900. And man, you get down to here and what do you see? Ah, where did you come from? Why don't I know anything about you? I can't find anything about you. I can find Skillings, and he was on Railroad Street. I knew that. Okay, if he's on Railroad Street, is the Bethel Spool Company on Railroad Street? And is it maybe a sawmill and not a spool mill that's associated with the steam mill and Skillingston? I don't know. And this is a house built by David Skillings at the foot of Rangeley Place in Winchester, Massachusetts. He built this for his two kids, William and Julius. When they came to visit with their families, they could stay at their little cottage.
There you go.
And this one is 19 Rangeley Place in Winchester, Massachusetts. These are all of these 10 houses or more are on the National Historic Register. So, and he was a carpenter, he just liked to build houses. Okay, we're in West Bethel now, and where we have Alpheus Bean with a sawmill where Kendall's was, and N.S. Stowell was there. And there's something there now, but I don't know what it is.
That's cross exclusion garage.
Okay. And he had a general store, which originally I thought started out, later became a head store. I don't believe that anymore. I believe it was about where the big house was, or the barn, because I can find it on a 1911 map, the Bean store. So I'll do more research on that. And here's Marilyn Springer in West Bethel, Maine, showing they had spools for silk, cotton, and linen thread. And again, on the railroad, the Skilling's Mills, 3.5 miles this way, and this mill over here, you can see the stacks of squares that are going to go down to Bethel to be sawn into spools, and then there's Newton and Tibbetts over in this direction. And this is the only photograph I've ever seen of the Allen's Depot in West Bethel. Usually I can find West Bethel. This one says Allen's. And it was named after John Allen, its first station agent, who was an agent from 1851 to 1873. And this is the real purpose of spools, as you know, if you're a kid. You put them on a string and you swing them around. And you have fun. And this is a photo taken at the 1820 house in Dixfield about 1930. And this is Justin, Albert, and Charlotte Root. This is their grandfather, Albert Barnard Root the first, and this is his his aunt, Emily Knight. And she died in 1935, so this is probably 1930. And the Stowells are all cousins to these kids here. And I got this picture from one of the descendants in Lafayette, New York, Karen Rue Grimm. That's it, I'm done. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot.